Hello my fiery friends, the Infernoman here with the hottest in holiday deck technology. And for today's deck tech, first off I simply want to say happy Valentine's Day for those of you that do celebrate. But if you're a person that doesn't celebrate this holiday, or maybe you're the kind of cynical person that maybe I once was that would say, love is dead and I do not care about this holiday.
I defy you, Heartman!
I hear you out, and I think, honestly, you're in the right spot for today's deck tech. So, without further ado, join me today for a special edition deck tech in the Explorer format, a deck that is simply full of undying love. But before we continue, if you do like any of the content that I do, please like, follow, and subscribe wherever you watch the content. You can support me monthly for a small amount on Patreon, where I have all of my extended bonus footage posted. We also have a Redbubble spot where you can buy merch like stickers and shirts, or for free, all you can just do also is just join our growing community on Discord. Your support helps keep this channel going. All links are in the details below. Longtime viewers of the channel know how we do it. We have to talk about the stats of the deck before we dive right in. So our Undying Love deck is a zombie deck that is made up of white and black. You're looking at an average mana curve of about 1.7, and we're going to be rocking 32 creatures, 4 instants, 4 sorceries, and 20 lands. As was mentioned earlier in the intro, Undying Love is an Orzhov zombie deck where we just want to try to amass as many zombies as possible to hopefully drain out our opponent. And even if we cannot do that, we have plenty of ways of just drawing some extra cards for value, sacrificing those zombies for value, and no matter what happens to our zombies, even if the whole board gets blown up, we have a secret card that came to us from Foundations that can bring them all back and ensure that we can still get our victory no matter what our opponent throws at us. But you may be asking yourself, how can we pull this off on such a tight budget of only 12 rares?
Good question.
Well, I'm glad you asked. So without further ado, let's show you exactly what we're working with today. Starting in the 1-drop slot, we will have Champion of the Parish here, an absolutely awesome 1-drop here. Wherever another zombie enters, we get a +1/+1 counter on it. It'll get super big, super quickly if our opponent has no answer for it. As far as our rest of our strategy goes, we will need to draw some cards. So Crypt Breaker here is going to be one of our key pieces here. So let's talk about this for just a moment. Crypt Breaker here is going to be a 1-drop 1/1 zombie that says you can either pay 2 and tap it to discard a card, and then create a 2/2 zombie creature token. Or you can tap 3 untapped zombies at any time, and then you can draw a card and you will lose 1 life. So this is going to be one of our card draw engines to help keep churning through our deck to get to everything we need. We'll also need to mill some cards just in case to fill up the graveyard for one of our strategies here. So we're going to be utilizing Fester Leech here. As long as we do combat damage to a player, you get to mill 2 cards. For additional mill, we'll also have Stitcher Supplier here. When this card enters, you get to mill 3 cards, or if it dies, you can also still mill 3 cards. I did forget to mention, however, Fester Leech does have 1 secondary ability if we need to use a little bit of combat tricks here. So for 2 mana, you can also give this an extra pump, so that way it becomes a 3/3 until end of turn. However, you can only activate it once. And then finally, for a little bit of either spot removal if we need to in a pinch, or some pseudo ramp, we'll have Shambling Ghast here. When this dies, you can either give one of our opponent's creatures -1/-1, or you get to make a treasure token, whichever you need at that moment. For the 2-drop slot here, we'll use 2 copies of Lazotap Reaver. When it enters, you get to amass Zombies 1, so this will create for us another nice little token to help us trigger off a couple other abilities we'll talk about in just a moment. If the board is getting gummed up, however, we'll also utilize Siege Zombie here. We can also tap 3 untapped creatures we control to make our opponent lose 1 life. Slow, but surely this will help us just drain out our opponent. However, our best and most awesomest of creatures for this whole deck is going to be both Corpse Knight and Wayward Servant, which will of course help us just drain out our opponent for pretty much doing absolutely nothing. So Corpse Knight here specifically, whenever another creature enters, our opponent will lose 1 life. And Wayward Servant is even better because whenever another zombie we control enters, we get to drain our opponent for 1 and we will gain 1 life. Great for stabilization in case of an aggro deck or 2 gets a little cheeky against our strategy. As far as the non-creature spells in our deck, we're going to be utilizing copies of Deadly Dispute here. All we simply, of course, are going to do is sacrifice one of our zombies here to then draw some cards and create a treasure token to help keep churning through our deck. However, the main star of the show and the one whole reason we're actually doing this whole deck is going to be Raise the Past. Let's talk about this card for just a moment. Raise the Past here is a 4-mana sorcery that simply reads, return all creature cards with a mana value of 2 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. So you probably already figured out this is going to be one of our sweetest ways of getting to victory. Even if our opponent just blows up every single one of our zombies, we don't care because this 1 card here alone will just help us just bring everything back, trigger off everything with Corpse Knight once it enters, along with Wayward Servant, and we can just blow our opponent away with 1 fell swoop. As far as the land base is concerned, it's as simple as you can be, of course, because we are going to keep this as a budget deck. So we'll have 2 plains, 6 swamps, 4 forlorn flats here. When it enters, you can ping your opponent for 1, and some secluded courtyards and unclaimed territories. Since the majority of our deck is very creature heavy, we're going to try to use these creature lands to just make sure we have the right mana when we need it. As far as your sideboard is concerned, if you do want to take this into best of 3, here's what I would recommend for you. So against enemy combo decks and control decks out there, we're going to be utilizing copies of Deafening Silence. We're also going to utilize the rest for the same reason, to also just slow down those combo control decks out there. For graveyard shenanigans, to stop those, you'll use Soul Guide Lantern here. If you do need a little bit of spot removal and you just want to just maybe pump up your zombies if you want to be on the aggro side, you can put in Case of the Gateway Express. Just ping your opponent, and once you then swing with 3 creatures, you get a +1/+0 pump. And then finally, if you're doing with any artifacts, enchantment hate, or even planeswalkers, you also can utilize here copies of Fracture. As far as tips and tricks I can give you, it mostly comes down to 3 different strategies for the deck. If your opponent doesn't have any creatures out, you can then start swinging as aggro as possible to then hopefully just beat down your opponent before they have an answer. That's why we have cards like Champion of the Parish, because as long as you keep putting out more and more zombies, it'll keep getting bigger and bigger, so your opponent has no choice but to answer it at some point. On the other hand, if your opponent is getting a little big with creatures, whether they may have some super giant creature or maybe they're going wide like you are, then you just stall out and wait until you get your Corpse Knight and Wayward Servants out. With these cards out, you can eventually just drain out your opponent until you have enough zombies on the battlefield to either swing or just keep gumming out the board until you have cards such as Siege Zombie or Crypt Breaker out, which will allow you to either just tap your creatures down and stall, or just help tap your creatures down to keep drawing the cards that you do need to get to your victory. And then finally, and this will lead me of course to the biggest advantage your deck has, once you have a Raise the Past in your hand, you don't care about what happens to your zombies. And I know for this holiday, it sounds a little heartless, if you will. Ha. No! Honestly, we just want our zombies to either stay on the battlefield or just get blown up and put into the graveyard, so then Raise the Past will have more fuel as the game progresses. And don't be afraid to sacrifice cards such as Stitcher Supplier or Lasso Tap Reaver to a Deadly Dispute, so that way you can keep churning through your deck and filling up your graveyard. Once you have a critical mass of them in that graveyard, and as long as you have that Raise the Past, you should be able to bring everything back and just blow out your opponent with one single card. Having said all that, that does lead us of course to the 2 major weaknesses to our deck. First off, if your opponent does have graveyard hate in their main deck, then your Raise the Past is not going to really get a chance to do much of anything, especially once your opponent figures out your strategy. That also leads me of course to one other major thing. Although we don't really care about wraths in general, if your opponent has mass exile, then that's when you're going to feel a little sad. So just keep in mind of those 2 things with this strategy. Honestly, this deck, in my opinion, feels much better in best of 1 versus best of 3, because once your opponent figures out things from the first match, if you're playing best of 3, then be prepared to deal with that graveyard hate or that mass removal in case your opponent may be packing it. But even with those things to keep in mind, honestly, this deck is very straightforward and a very easy deck that you'll have a lot of fun playing with, and I assure you, you'll just definitely fall in love with if you don't mind dealing with the undead. Now, if you did enjoy today's strategy, or maybe you're just a fan of theme decks in general, I will show you on screen right now a couple of other theme decks we have done throughout the course of this video, both based on this holiday and other holidays we have done in the past. If you haven't already noticed, those links have been scattered throughout the course of this video, so if you want to show me a little bit of love support, please click on one of those links, because who knows, maybe you might find a deck you might actually fall in love with yourself. And with that all out of the way, here are my final thoughts that I want to give on this deck. Honestly, I know what you were thinking. You probably were not expecting a zombie deck created for Valentine's Day, but rest assured, the moment I personally saw that Raise the Past was added in from MTG Foundations, I knew this card was a match made in heaven for the strategy that we put together today. So, to put it another way, if you're a fan of zombie decks, if you're a fan of graveyard strategies, and if you're a fan of going either super big, going super wide, or draining out your opponent with a giant zombie army, then I would definitely say, give this deck a try, and I assure you, when you manage to just fill your graveyard with a giant army of zombies and bring them back with Raise the Past, you're going to have a lot of fun doing so. You'll be very surprised at how we can pull this off on the budget that we had today, and whether you play this on the holiday or not, I assure you, you will definitely not be disappointed. That's all I have for you today. Thanks again for watching, everyone, and just remember that no matter what you do play in the game of life, always be sure to burn bright. Later.